Earlier today I've made a Reddit post about where I was gone for the weekend and came back to a stash full of currency, and a ton of people have asked me how I do that, how to craft, can you give me help, can you show me what were the items you were selling, how did that work? And I thought, well, before answering every single question, well, I did answer a lot of questions, but before going to, well, everybody and explaining every single detail, I thought I would make a video where I talk about crafting principles, which, well, are applicable to item pricing as well, but generally things everybody needs to know at some point in PoE if you want to build up a pile of currency and not just pick it off the ground. So while this definitely is not an exhaustive list, I want to talk about types of crafting, I want to talk about understanding how items are built, I want to talk about methods of crafting, and I want to talk about the most important thing, which is when to stop. But more of that later. First of all, I want to go in my history and talk about a couple of things, so let's take a look. When we check out my history, we see there are tons of different items for tons of different prices, and all of these had a reason to be in my sell stash, and only a couple of those were crafted specifically. But there are a lot of very different items, but some items are seen multiple times, which are, for example, the crest shields, or the tenebrous amulets, or the omen scepter. Well, let's take a look why that is. To my understanding, or how I see it, there are 4 types of crafting. There is self-crafting for a niche, there is self-crafting within a meta, there is pure profit crafting, and there's mirror crafting. Those are very roughly the 4 types of crafting you can do, which all of them have up and downsides. The first kind of is the worst. When you're self-crafting and you are in a niche, you oftentimes just lose currency. The problem is that even if you do generate bricks while crafting, the chance of them selling for a high currency is very low. The only reason why that would be sometimes is when the meta shifts into a direction you're liking, or if there's something happening or some reason why suddenly you're gaining a lot of value from this item. One that can sometimes apply to me, for example, is when I am crafting for my builds, which oftentimes are kinda niche because I'm just a very niche player and I like creating build types or archetypes that are not very much seen, and the videos get a lot of traction. Because while I'm not a huge content creator, sometimes my builds get enough traction for the market to have an impact on that. For example, if I'm crafting a lot of amulets for myself, which is mostly the tenebrous amulets we see here, we can see all of these are kind of similar. And they started selling after I made, well, my build more public, and people have seen it, and probably people have started it and are looking at my PoE-Ninja and looking at other people's PoE-Ninja, and then they are looking for these items. The reason why these are selling is not because they are insanely hard to craft, and I did show exactly how to craft these on my TikTok. The reason is the supply is extremely low, because technically only I am creating these amulets. By now there might be more people who are crafting for themselves, because they know they don't have to pay 150 div for this, but they also create bricks they throw on the market. So these types of items will have a spike in value if a build gets traction, and then go down again when more people craft for this type, but they will always retain a certain amount of value because they rarely do have enough supply to really satisfy all the demand. If you are crafting bows, for example, into a very straight meta, you will probably always have a bad time. While you can make profit, it's very difficult because there are so many ranger players that the market is completely oversaturated by bows people have deemed unworthy of themselves. So when they just upgrade their bow and throw their old bow onto the market, well, another bow just enters the market that won't find a seller, and these bows pile up, and only the best ones will sell at some point. So the price goes down and down and down, and crafting is not profitable for them. Which is the reasons self-crafting for a meta can be profitable but doesn't have to. This is pretty good if you are in a small and not oversaturated meta, or know the meta very early on and can craft for it before people have figured out the recipes. This, for example, was very big in the early stages of this league for quivers and amulets for rangers, because these were technically very easy to craft, but people haven't figured it out yet. So some people have realized, okay, I can make this amulet for 5 to 10 divines and sell it for 50 to 100. And those, well, they made a lot of currency. So understanding the meta early on and finding a crafting niche probably is the best thing you can do in terms of currency. Which would bring us into the third type, the profit crafting. Profit crafting is finding a niche that is not oversupplied or oversaturated, and then crafting directly into this. This can have multiple stages. And most crafters that are, well, I say professional crafters in the terms of they do this every league and they are successful every single league. These people have a very, very strict idea of what they are doing. They are creating a character, going to level 80, 90, whatever, where they are comfortable with, and get a base of currency. This might be as much as 2 to 3 divines. Then they take these 2 to 3 divines to take their first craft. They see, okay, with a ranger meta, right now the people are entering maps. You need to be extremely fast for this to be really good, but you can always go into it if you have the funds. But generally in the league start, you would check the meta and see, okay, right now people need bows. I know with these essences and these 3 steps, I can make a bow for 2 divines that sells for 4 divines. They do this craft like 10, 15, 20 times. So they pile up 100 divines. Then they take these 100 divines and make something for this meta that is slightly more difficult to craft but higher rewarding. So for example, they take these 100 divines and make 10 quivers that sell between 10 and 60 divines. So they make 300 divines. Then they take these 300 divines and apply the same crafting method. So they take these and put it into crafts that take maybe 30 to 50 divines but pay out 100 or 150. So they make 10 of these and then have 1000 divines. And this escalates extremely quickly if you know what you're doing. This is the type of people that finance mirror crafting. Because these generally are the people that enjoy crafting, but oftentimes are not going for mirror crafting. Some of them do, but a lot of them just will play for the market and sometimes fund mirror crafting. Because mirror crafting is a lot easier when big streamers do it, because they have more funds. So basically what they are doing is they go to somebody who's mirror crafting and say, hey, I'll give you 4,000 divines and you're crafting this piece, and then I am getting the mirror fee until the item is fully paid, and then after that they are getting a part of the fee. For example, mirror item is created for 30 fee, and this person gets 5 divines or 10 divines of the fee for the rest of the league. So basically they are building up a pile of currency, giving it to a mirror crafter, or crafting it themselves. Both of these exist, and then they, well, profit off it for the rest of the league. And this again brings us to the 4th type, which is mirror crafting. This is an overlap between the 3rd and the 4th type, but the 3rd type can be done without the 4th type. Mirror crafting is something that never is profitable until it is finished. These items require insane amounts of currency and basically just are funneled into until they are done, and oftentimes funneled into by a lot of people because they know they all are profiting more of it the faster they are, because there are multiple mirror crafters competing with spots, especially into the meta. For example, early this league there are 3, 4, 5, 6 mirror bows, all just slightly above each other to, well, get the next mirror fee. For this, basically, if you are mirror crafting, you don't need this video really. So let's take a look at the next thing I'm talking about. The second thing you need to understand is how an item is built. And this for a lot of people will be very boring because they know it, but a lot of people, well, don't know all the things. And for crafting, you need to know all the things. So what are the things that can be on an item? Let's take a look. On this body armor, for example, we have prefixes, which are the top 3 mods. We have suffixes, which are the bottom 3 mods. We have the runes, which is the lower highlighted line at the top, and we have an implicit or enchantment here in PoE-2, which is the upper highlighted line, which is the 39 life. Very important distinction here: in Path of Exile 2, corruptions are enchantments which always go on top on the item. In PoE-1, corruptions replace the implicit. So for example, if I had this belt that has 3 charm slots, and, well, that's not modifiable and that's not really removable, and we have flasks gain charge per second, in PoE-2 corruption goes above this. In PoE-1 the corruption would replace the flask mod. But there are a lot of more important things, so let's take a look at Craft of Exile and PoE. These are the two most important sources you need when crafting. What you can do here is taking a look at what an item actually is built of. So let's take a look at intelligence gloves, for example. We can see these are the prefixes, these are the suffixes. All of these have a weighting, which means that if I'm rolling for an item, I'm rolling within the weighting and hitting these mods. So if a mod has a very low weighting, it's harder to hit. Let's take a look at something here. For example, +2 to melee skills only has a weighting of 250. Which is a 0.3% roughly within the suffixes. So it's, well, out of 90,000. Very, very difficult to hit if you aren't specifically targeting it. And to target something specifically, you need to be aware of how an item is built, which means mod groups, item level, tags, etc. So let's take a look at something that is pretty nice to understand here actually, which is amulets. Amulets are pretty cool because they are very deterministic currently and have very cool options. For example, let's take a look at a caster amulet. What I'm looking for is an amulet with +3 caster modifier. Now I want this +3, but this has a weighting of 100, which is very, very difficult to hit. Actually, caster is up here, but it still is 100. So what can we do? We can say we want caster modifiers only, which would mean we are crafting on an amulet that only has caster modifiers. So one out of these modifiers is on the item. These have damage, speed, and gem also. Now, when we take a look at gem, for example, we see minion is there as well. But this is one mod group. A mod group means that I cannot roll the same mods within a mod group. This is extremely important for weapons, for example, because when you run cold damage, it is in the same mod group as fire damage. So if you have a weapon with increases to cold damage, you cannot have increases to fire damage on the same weapon because they share a mod pool. But because we are not starting with the spell damage, we don't have the gem tag. We would start with the cast speed, for example. Now we have cast speed and speed. This is pretty fine because we don't have any mods that are important to us. If we had cast speed and damage, we would have the increased damage bonus. This is fairly fine if we do have spell damage and cast speed, but if we do only have spell damage, this is annoying. Because suddenly we have 3 mods to hit, which is too much. 3 mods is something we do not really want. So ideally you do have cast speed only. Because if you do have only cast speed, what you can do, let's take a look here quickly because it's easier to show. We have jewelry, we have amulet, and then you have your cast speed mod on the amulet, and we are crafting with an exalted orb. We have cast speed here. We press right click so that the game knows we have a cast speed. Then we want caster modifier, and then we want to say advanced method, and we want to use a perfect exalted orb. This is because now we can see that when we are crafting, we can only hit tier 1 level of all spell skills and only hit tier 1 and tier 2 in spell damage. However, here we have a weighting of 100 and here of 2000. So now we have to understand what do we have to do. We want to only have a suffix here, which is the sinister, which is the dex exaltation, which means when we now run homogenizing exaltation, we can get rid of the cast attack here because homogenizing understands that we have only the cast and the speed tag, and the only mod we can hit now is tier 1 cast speed, which makes the craft extremely easy. Then when we take a look at amulets, here we can do more or less the same thing, but a little more convenient, sometimes a little more annoying at other times. For example, if you're running a perfect exalted orb, you have a minimum level of 45. Now what you see is here we only have the tier 1s shown anymore. This disables all the other mods that are below, and sometimes I'm switching between these because sometimes I want to see the other values and not just have them gone. It's just a matter of taste, and I would advise to get used to both of these sides because both of these have up and down sides. The third principle you need to know is the method of crafting, and this can be extremely difficult. I have gone into it slightly, but really this is extremely difficult to learn and takes tons of experience, and there isn't really much of a way around it because there are just a lot of crafting methods and a lot of ways, and you need to understand which is the best one. I've just shown one for cast speed and spell mods, for example, but these are very, very different from item to item. Generally, I would put these into, again, 3 different types: fast crafting, profitable crafting and safe crafting. Fast crafting is something where you just want an item very, very quick. This is something, as an example, mirror crafters do. They want the item as quickly as possible most of the time to have an advantage in the market. But also this can be feasible to do if you're looking at crafting an amulet and you're looking at crafting an amulet for 2 divines or 3 divines. But 2 divines takes 10 minutes, 3 divines takes an hour. Well, choose your time wisely. I would always go for the 10-minute craft because even though it's a bit more expensive, we're saving so much time that it's worth it. But you need for that to understand why it takes more time, and again, that takes experience. It's difficult, I know. Then we have profitable craft. These generally are types of crafts that take a bit longer, but use cheaper currency for better results. Here, really, again, it is the evaluation of, for example, do I want to use a perfect X or a greater X? What are the odds? And here, well, you have to do some math. If you want to be successful at this, you need to understand when which type of currency is the most efficient in which situation. Like, there is no way around experience. I could stand here and talk about crafting for 2 hours straight, no problem. But that won't help you at all. You need to really build experience here, and I would advise to do so with cheap crafts or stuff you find on YouTube. I'll show you in a second. And then you have the third way, which is the safe craft. This is basically the worst of both worlds, because generally you don't want to craft safe. You want to craft profitable and quickly. The safe craft would be a craft where you are saying, I want this outcome and I want to get there as safe as possible. And this only is reasonable if the base you are crafting on is extremely inaccessible. So for example, if you're crafting on a 3-slot item level 82 vial rope, these cost like 200 to 300 divines per piece, and you want to be really sure not to do something wrong, because, well, they are so fucking expensive. So this really is the only way where you want to go safe crafting. Generally, you don't want to do this aside from mirror crafting and extremely difficult to make bases. And then the most important part, in my opinion, is know when to stop. Because, well, you can craft an amulet and go for it, and I'll show a couple of examples in a second, and say to yourself, well, this amulet looks pretty good, and if this mod was different, I could wear it. And then you throw the null and go cry in a corner. Don't do this. Most of the time, it's better if you have a not perfect result to sell it and go for another base. Oftentimes, creating a new base is cheaper than the item you would sell. Not always, but oftentimes. So let's take a look at the amulets I have made. The first one was one where you can see I failed the fracture. Because the first thing I would do is get the cast, get the +3, get a third mod with a greater exalted orb, and then throw in a collarbone, so I have an unveiled mod which the fracture cannot hit, and then throw the fracture. And here I did not hit the +3, but I've seen, okay, I have cast speed tier 1 pretty good, I have the +3, and I have all resistance. Which means that I can very, very safely get 2 more resistances. So I just picked up a greater X, a homo X, and a suffix X, and threw these onto this for 2 resistances, then unveiled my collarbone and picked the first thing that was good. I didn't do more on it. This craft was probably 2 divines? 3 divines? Actually, perfect exalteds are a bit more expensive, maybe 4 divines. That's sold for 21. Because I've seen, okay, I can take this brick and put it a step further. Let's take a look at the next one. This here, again, I failed the fracture. And then I was like, okay, this is annoying, but I can still try. I throw on the increased intelligence just to have something to work with. So this is an essence mod. I removed the prefix because that one was safe to remove and got a suffix. And then I knew when I now homo double X the suffixes, I can only hit attribute modifiers, because when we take a look at the amulet and we have caster, these are the only suffixes, and then we have one attribute modifier. Where's the attribute? There. These are the only mods I can hit. So I actually do have a decent chance of hitting the mods I'm looking for, because I was looking for all attributes and intelligence. So then again, I double homo exalted suffixes for all attributes and dexterity. Actually, you don't have to use the suffix omen here because the prefix, oh actually you do have here if you haven't put the collarbone on here, because you can hit a caster mod in the prefixes, so you want to suffix exalt here. And then I did hit all attributes, tier 5 pretty bad, and dexterity tier 3 pretty bad. And I was like, yeah, whatever, collarbone and sell. And well, it did sell. It did sell pretty well after reducing the price for a long time, because I don't sell these things in like a second. I'm taking a lot of time for these to sell because I'm starting my prices high and lowering them, because I know I don't need the currency right now. I'm just lowering them until they sales. Usually my items sit in my stash for at least 3 days, because I'm starting with prices very high and then go low, just to sell it at the best point possible. So let's take a look at other example of amulets. Here we were crafting again. This was one of my older amulets, which I was using for a long time. Same thing again. This was one I crafted for myself when I still needed a lot more spirit, which I don't anymore, so I sold this one. But let's take a look. These sometimes are bricks, sometimes are not bricks. And this looks like an old one of mine with some rarity. Actually, this one is from my aura bot. We were crafting amulets from my aura bot, and we started with spirit bases because those were less expensive. Again, Tenebros failed fracture here, so I just threw stuff on there and sold it, didn't care. And yeah, I do think there are a couple of interesting ones. This one is, again, pretty much the same amulet. Here I was just looking for tier 1s and selling everything that did hit tier 2. I could, of course, annul off the suffixes and go again, but it was just not profitable. It was more reasonable to just put them online and sell them, and they would at some point sell, which worked fairly well in the end. But enough from amulets, let's take a look at scepters, because here it is basically the same. So when we take a look here we have an old scepter of my support. I was crafting for my support. We just put the old scepter online and get a new one. Same here. Here I was crafting again. We hit the spirit, we hit the crit chance, crit damage, area, basically all we wanted. And then I've hit a very, very bad allies increase mod. And this mod is extremely difficult to hit. So here, I realized if I'm using Omen of Lights here, until I hit the increased damage mods, it would exceed the cost of creating the exact same scepter with a tier 1 crit damage. And that's why I sold it, because it had tier 2 crit damage. This was the reason. The scepter was basically perfect, aside from the prefixes were not done, and the suffixes were tier 2, and I realized I could make a cheaper one, which was better. Also, I realized I only have one socket on the scepter, which in this price range basically is very bad. So I was like, okay, no, we are neither wearing this nor crafting further. I'm selling this and using the funds to craft the next one, which we did. Actually, I think I skipped an interesting one here. No, this was the craft one, this was the other one. So that's fine. Here was one where I again failed the fracture, but I knew I can, with targeting these mods, fairly easily make a scepter that would still sell. So I was just double axing the suffixes for cast speed and crit damage, and then finishing the prefixes with a jawbone, and sold it again. So it is extremely important to know when to stop and when to sell your items. Just quickly, the characters we are using this on is a blood mage. I've made a couple of videos on this, and a support where I will be making a video soonish. I was gone for the weekend, so I didn't have time there, but we will cover this character in the upcoming video after this. I hope maybe tomorrow, maybe later. It will take quite a bit of work to get ready, but you'll get the video, I promise. And here basically I wanted to show one more thing. This was the Reddit post for the ring I made, and this again was fairly easy to craft, and I broke down in my TikToks, and was one that was very interesting to make because it was so easy to make, and again fairly profitable to sell. But I just hit it my version so quickly that I just was like, well, I'm not crafting anymore, so didn't make much profit of it. But it was a very interesting craft because it's actually extremely easy to make. While it has a lot of steps, these are very, very easy and don't have a lot of fails. They just can hit the wrong attributes or tier 2 or tier 3 attributes, where you would just take the ring, sell it, and take the next base. And here we have the scepter I was crafting. This one is actually about mirrored here. This has an item value of 1,000 to 1,500 divines when just taking the average crafting cost into account. So making these is extremely difficult because you basically have to chaos bomb for increased spirit and for increased damage, which is about 40 to 60 divines already, maybe more. The chaos is rising in price quickly, and then you basically have to hit the double tier 1s and stuff like that and divining, and it's very expensive but a very nice craft. And here I was showing basically the process of how I was crafting these amulets. So you can see I had a lot of amulets, then I was homo exalting them and going for the +3. Here I had 10 amulets prepared with the cast speed and the prefix, the unveiled, and then I would just throw in the next mod and fracture. But you can just take a look at the shot yourself, it's well out there. And I was showing how to craft this here, and was explaining my different approaches of how I started to craft this and why I stopped the different approaches, so maybe you get some more insight here. Overall, it's a very long video already, and it's somewhat vague, which is annoying when I sell these other things you have to know, but really it comes down to experience a lot, and I hope I could just give you some ideas at hand of, well, how to get better at crafting and not just explaining how I'm creating this specific craft. So if you have any questions, really put them in the comment section. I will try to explain everything, and if there's so much, then I will probably just make another part of this video and see you there. So all I can say is thanks for watching. See you in the next one.